Good afternoon, everyone. Hello and welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Natalie MacLees. I'm founder of AARdvark, which is an accessibility testing platform. I do live streams every other Wednesday afternoon. Well, afternoon in my time zone. I'm in Los Angeles, California. So 1 p.m. California time, every other Wednesday, I do live streams on different accessibility topics. And you are welcome to join anytime. They are recorded. If you miss them or miss part of it or want to come back and review, they are saved for as long as the platforms exist, I suppose, on both YouTube and LinkedIn. They are also on Facebook, but Facebook only stores live videos for 30 days and then they delete them. But they will be up indefinitely on YouTube and LinkedIn. So if you need help finding those, just let me know. So today is part 3, our final part of our ARIA Deep Dive, where we are looking at ARIA, which is Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and is a way to make all of our fancy web applications that act more like desktop applications accessible. So let's talk about how that works. So in part 1, we did talk about states and properties, and we just kind of did a big broad overview of all the different ARIA states and properties. And I think we also did roles in that one and when to use them and what options were available. And then last week, it is completely escaping my mind. I think or not last week, the last stream, I was very sick and yeah, I don't remember what part 2 was. That's kind of embarrassing. Well, we can find it on well, let's go find it on YouTube. Why don't we? Oh, it thinks I wanted an aardvark. No, let's see. Although that would be very cute, wouldn't it? Okay, here's my aardvark channel. And of course, I don't want to go to, okay, we'll go to live regions. That's what we did last time. Okay, I remember. Yes, I must have been more out of it than I realized. All right, so there's our part 1 where we did states, roles, and properties. Part 2, we did live regions, and today's we're doing states and properties in action, which are states and properties that are going to change dynamically as users interact with our page. And we're going to keep track of which element exactly that those different attributes should be on, how we should change them with JavaScript as needed as the users interact with the page. And we'll take a quick look at how those work with VoiceOver on my Mac. And you could also give them a try. This demo website is public. So it is at discoverneptune.site/aria. We'll take you to this little demo site that I'm using today if you want to follow along or give these a try in your own environment, your own screen reader, your own keyboard, and see how things work. And let me know if you have any questions about anything as you play around with that. So welcome here to part 3, now that we've established what happened in parts 1 and 2. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today, and it's quite a lot, so I might go a little bit fast because I am trying to fit it into an hour. I know everybody is busy. Everybody's got a lot of things to do with their day. So we're going to talk about aria-expanded, which is when we have some kind of disclosure, right? Like I click this, it toggles open. I can click it again, probably to toggle it closed. So we've got accordions, menus, select drop downs, things like that. Well, not semantic select drop downs. We don't have to do anything special for those, but if we're building a replacement, a custom replacement for those, we're going to talk about aria-pressed, aria-selected, and aria-checked, and when we would use each one of those because they get misused and misunderstood quite a lot. We're going to talk about aria-current to help us keep track of where we are in a set of things. We're going to talk about some forms, and that will involve aria-invalid, aria-required, and aria-describedby, and how we can actually make sure that forms are informing our users about errors and how to correct their form input so they can submit their form. And we'll talk a little bit about ARIA disabled versus disabled. And it's not on the list there, but we'll also cover ARIA required versus required and what the difference between those two things are and when you would want to use which one. And then there are some little debugging exercises at the end that we may not have time to do together, but the website will be up and you can go and try those out, maybe without me if we run out of time. All right, so without further ado, I think because we do have so much to cover, let's go ahead and dive into this first demo, which is the aria-expanded. All right, so, and this is a show more toggle, right? We see these all the time across the web, and with my mouse, I can toggle this one, no problem. Oh no, there's a color contrast issue there, but that's okay on the hover. So, I just toggle this, I can see something, I can click it again and close it. So that's basically what we're talking about when we say a disclosure. So you can see that even though I've got two examples sitting here side by side, left and right, and when I click on that left one, it appears to work just fine with my mouse. I don't see any problems with it, but we'll see what happens when we try to use that with a screen reader, and we'll understand why it's broken. So let me dive into doing that right now. I'll use the broken one, and then I'll use the good one. And I hope the screen reader is loud enough. Let me make sure my volume is up. All right, let's go ahead and turn it on.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Disclosure. ARIA states and prop.
Okay, so I hope that is loud enough. That is quite loud for me sitting here. So I hope the microphone is picking it up. All right, so I always say, if you've been here before, then surely you've heard me. I always say the first thing you need to learn when you're learning how to use a screen reader is how to make it stop talking. With VoiceOver, that's just hitting the control button on the keyboard. So anytime it's talking and you want it to stop, you can just hit control and it will stop talking until, of course, you start interacting with the page again, at which point it's going to start talking again. But I don't need it to announce everything to me about where I am. So let me just navigate into this page and navigate to that first broken example. And then I'll demo it and we'll talk about it.
New open toolbar bookmark. Disclosure. In disclosure, ARIA state headings menu. On 1, demo 1, 3, hard-coded ARIA expanded equals false. Heading level 3 hard-coded. Level 2 ARIA expanded equals false. Heading level the patch shipping policy collapsed button. You are currently on a.
Okay, so when I landed on that button, you could hear that it said shipping policy collapsed button. So that tells me three things. It tells me the name of the button, shipping policy. It tells me the current state, which is collapsed. And it tells me that it's a button so that I know it's something I can interact with. So let's go ahead and activate the button and see what happens. Oh, absolutely nothing. Let me try going off the button and back onto it and see what happens.
The panel toggles visually. Shipping policy collapsed button. You are currently on a button.
Okay, so even when I came back to the button, I still heard shipping policy collapsed button. So there is an aria-expanded attribute on this button, but it's not getting dynamically updated the way that it needs to with JavaScript. So let me navigate over to the fixed example, and I'll demo how that one works.
Headings menu. Heading level 3 on shipping policy collapsed button. You are currently on a shipping policy expanded button. Shipping policy collapsed button.
All right, so you can hear that that one actually announces its state as I open and close it. I don't have to navigate away and back to the button. I can hear when it is expanded or when it is collapsed. And if you are here and you are a native screen reader user, yes, my screen reader is excruciatingly slow. But I have to do that for demos for folks so that they are not completely overwhelmed by the speed that most screen reader users use their screen reader at. So it is just the default out of the box speed, which should be relatively close to normal speaking speed, but it does sound very slow if you're used to using a screen reader or if you're just used to listening to all your podcasts and YouTube videos at 2x. So yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that. Okay, so let me turn the screen reader off here for a second.
Voiceover off.
All right, and let's scroll down and we'll look at the code difference here. And the difference between these two is that my JavaScript, this first example of JavaScript here, is the JavaScript that's for the broken example. And you can see that all it is doing is toggling that panel with the panel that has my shipping policy in it. So when I click the button, all it is toggling the hidden attribute on that panel that contains the information. So it is successfully showing and hiding the content, but it's not letting screen reader users know that it did that. So if we look at the fixed JavaScript example, we can see we're doing the same thing. We're listening for a click on the button, but now we're going to keep track on if it is open currently, and I'm going to get the current value of the aria-expanded attribute. And then I'm going to set that attribute to a Boolean, either true or false, so that it matches. And then I'm going to trigger that panel to either show or hide based on whether or not aria-expanded is true or false. So now I'm showing and hiding that content, but I'm also toggling the value of that aria-expanded attribute. So two things that people get wrong a lot is that people want to put the aria-expanded attribute on the panel, on the thing that's actually being shown and hidden. And I get it, because in your mind, that's the thing that's either expanded or collapsed, right? It's either hidden or it's not. But it has to go on the button because that's the thing that's interactive. So that's the thing that a keyboard user or a screen reader user is actually interacting with. And so it has to describe its own state. So you kind of have to think of the button and the panel that's getting toggled together as kind of one component, and the expanded goes on the interactive portion of that. Now, we do also have, if this is all you need is I need a button that shows and hides a little box of content, we have natively a details and summary element in HTML now. So let's take a look at what that looks like, because we don't need any JavaScript to actually make this work. So here it is here. Again, I have shipping policy. And when I click it, it toggles and opens my shipping policy. I can click it again and close the shipping policy. So let me go ahead and fire up the screen reader, and I'll navigate down here and demo how that works with the screen reader.
Voiceover on Chrome. Disclosure. ARIA states and properties demos Google Chrome. Natalie, AARdvark access.
Okay.
Shipping policy. Expanded. Disclosure triangle. Group. Shipping policy. Collapsed. Disclosure triangle. Group. Shipping policy. Expand.
All right. So I think that was enough to give you a feel for it. Let me turn the screen reader back off.
Voiceover off.
There we go. So you can see that that worked very similarly to my fixed example from before, but this is just HTML. There's no JavaScript involved. So these native semantic HTML elements give us a lot of accessibility for free, and we don't have to mess around with writing extra JavaScript to make this work. That is a native HTML element that automatically communicates its open or closed state. It automatically hides and shows the panel content without me having to write JavaScript for it. So it's very handy, very important to keep in mind. And so as always, right, if there is semantic HTML to do the job that you need to do, you should use it instead of having to build these custom components that need ARIA attributes and JavaScript to make them work correctly. Use the semantic thing if that's an option. And that applies for if we're talking about buttons, select dropdowns, form inputs, these kinds of toggles, right? If there's something native available, use it because that's going to be the most accessible option that we have. All right, so let's take a look at 3 patterns that we have. So we have a disclosure, show more, FAQ accordion, right? Different things like that. And aria-expanded would go on the button. That's going to show or hide the content. And this is our simplest case. And this is the one that's most easily replaced with the details and summary HTML semantic element. We have a navigation menu, which I'm sure you've seen websites where you hover or maybe you tabbed your menu item and a submenu opens. So in this case, we would want to put the aria-expanded on the button that opens the menu. It's the same logic. And then we can pair that with aria controls to point at the menu container so that we programmatically tie the button to the container that it's toggling. And then if we have a combo box, the aria-expanded would go on the combo box input or whatever element we have that has the role of combo box. And that's when you're building a custom replacement for a select dropdown. And that's going to communicate whether or not that dropdown list is open or closed. And that we would also pair with aria controls. All right, so that is disclosure and how to correctly use aria-expanded. So let's jump on over to the toggle button example and talk about aria-pressed and some of the other attributes that seem very similar and sometimes get mixed up. All right, so here we've got a broken example. So we've got a toggle button that can be in 2 states. It can be basically pressed or unpressed. So it's a mute button. So it's not actually going to mute me. So it's just for show. But you can see that my broken example, when I press it, just the label of the button changes to unmute or mute. And so I can tell, I have to intuit the state based on the label, right? So if I'm hearing sound and I want to mute it, then I have to hit the mute button and then it becomes the unmute button. And now I have to know, oh, mute is on. And if I want to turn it off, I have to click this button. So we see this a lot, especially in videos with a play pause button, for example, I think is a more common use case than mute or unmute. And you can see that there's a little bit of extra cognitive load there in figuring out what is that button going to do? Because the current state has to kind of be intuited from the action written on the button. And we'll hear how that works with the screen reader as well. And then here in the fixed example, we're actually going to go ahead and use aria-pressed instead of toggling the button. And we'll just style the button visually in a different way. So now we have 2 cues. We have a visual cue that shows me a checkbox when this is actually on. And it could be any number of things. It could be a little light, that looks lit up or dark that's somewhere on the button. There's all different kinds of ways that we could make that look on and off design-wise. But we have some kind of visual clue that we've toggled the state of the button. And behind the scenes, you can see this here. I'm programmatically saying what the state of the button is so that can be communicated to screen readers or a refreshable braille display or whatever other assistive technology someone happens to be using. So let's go ahead and let me fire up the screen reader and we'll take a listen to what these 2 buttons sound like when I toggle them.
Voiceover on Chrome. New tool bookmarks. Tool toggle button. Headings menu. 1. Demo 2. Aria-pressed on a toggle 3. Label heading level 3 label swap. No. The unmute button. You are currently on a mute. unmute, mute, unmute.
So you can see with that example, we kind of have the same kind of cognitive load of figuring out what does that mean? Right, if I click a button that says mute and then it switches to unmute, I have to figure out like, oh, that means mute got turned on. And presumably I would be listening to something and I would hear the noise stop, so I would understand that's what happened, but it's a little bit confusing. So let me go over to the other button and we'll see what happens there.
Fix heading 1 aria tracks mute toggle button. You are currently on a toggle button to select or mute. Tracks the on/off state. Mute selected toggle button. You are currently on a toggle button to select or deselect this. Back. Description.
Oops.
Pressed voiceover off.
All right, so I spent a little time ahead of this stream kind of wrestling with this button and trying to figure out why when I land on it initially, it properly announces the name of the button, which is mute, that it's a toggle and its state when I first land on it. But when I actually toggle the state, it doesn't announce the updated state. As far as I can tell, there's nothing broken in my code, but it's just not working. And it looks identical to other code on other websites that works, which is one of the frustrations that I've had throughout my career in accessibility, is that sometimes you have two things that look identical, but one of them will work and one of them won't. And sometimes it's really challenging to figure it out. So I will keep working on that to see if I can't get this demo fixed. But it should be very straightforward. It's just toggling the aria-pressed attribute between true and false. And there shouldn't really be anything else to it. But you could hear that when I went off the button and came back to it, you did hear the state update. And I have to figure out why this one is being so problematic for me. But I will see if I can get that fixed in the demo because it is a little bit weird. So let's look at the code difference between the broken example and the fixed example. So in the broken example, we're just listening for a click on the button and then just modifying the text on the button. Now, if that were a real mute button, there would obviously be another function that would run that would actually mute whatever sound was going on. But for this example, we don't actually have anything for that to do. But so there would be more to this function, basically. And when we look at the other one, we are listening for that click and then toggling the value of aria-pressed between true and false. So that, and then we're also toggling, we can use the same aria attribute in the CSS to style the selected style. So we get that extra bonus where we don't have to add an extra CSS class of like mute on, mute off, and style those two classes separately. We can actually use this aria-pressed attribute to create the pressed and the unpressed visual style for the users who need to be able to see that visually. Okay, so we talked about it a little bit already, but the label swap version doesn't work very well. It's some extra cognitive load. It's always saying the opposite of what we tried to do, which is a little bit confusing. And then we also don't have an idea of how many options do we have. Like, is it just this and this? Or should there be something else? Where when we go to a toggle button and we understand it's either pressed or not pressed, and that's very easy to understand. So I understand immediately there's two options here. This is either on or off. It's black or white, 0 or 1. So which one is it? So let's talk about the ones that seem like they're the same as aria-pressed and talk about when we would use those. So first up, aria-pressed, we would use on buttons or on elements that have a role of button. And, you know, muting, bold, pinning, favoriting, following, right? You think about all of those things where you're either yes or no. And so either that's going to show an indication, on YouTube, if you're following somebody, the follow button is either lit up and I think red, right, to show you're following them, or it's grayed out and not, and it has that unpressed state. Okay, aria-selected seems like kind of the same, but we use aria-selected when we're selecting one thing from a set. Now, technically, it could be a set of two, because if we have a set of tabs, we might only have two tabs. But if we're picking one from a list, even if it is only a list of two, that's when we would want to use aria-selected. So when we're talking about, picking from a set of options in a select or a non-semantic select that we're building, tree grids, cells, tab sets, picking multiple files, etc., we would want to use aria-selected to say which one or ones were currently selected. And then aria-checked, which also seems very similar, we would use only on checkboxes, radio buttons, switches, and form fields, basically. Or if we're building a replacement for a form field. So if we're building a non-semantic checkbox, for example, and we want to make sure that it communicates its checked state, that's when we would use aria-checked. And note that aria-checked actually has 3 possible values, which is true, false, and mixed, which I'm sure you've come across the checkboxes that have the ambiguous state, right? Like when there's an overall checkbox for a subset and some are checked and some aren't, and that parent kind of shows just a line across the middle. That's that mixed state, showing that like this is an overall selector for a subset. So that's when we would use all of those different ones. So I did try to do some research on this little quirk and try to figure it out. And I did say here that my general advice is to not try to over-engineer this and like add a live region or do something else when it's not working, to really take the time to figure out why that isn't working, which I'm going to do. I'm going to come back to it and figure it out. You don't want to over-engineer it for a case like that. And then because you're going to end up having sometimes multiple announcements and it's going to be more annoying than helpful. And you just want to figure out exactly what's going on and what's happening there. There's probably some little nuance between the working example and the non-working example that I just have to figure out. All right, so then we have the rule of switch, which is usually represented as the actual little physical switch, right, with a circle that moves either to the left or to the right on a little track. So that would also use aria-checked rather than aria-pressed for whether it's on or off. It basically acts like a checkbox. And when the switch is in the on position, it's like a checked checkbox. And when it's off, it's like an unchecked checkbox. All right, let's take a look at tabs, because we see this pattern a lot on the web. And let's take a look at these 3 versions. So I've got overview, specs, and reviews. And when I click on it with my mouse, I can see that the content underneath that changes on the broken example. And it appears to work pretty much the same way on the fixed example. But let's fire up the screen reader and look at both of those and figure out how they sound to a screen reader user.
Voiceover on Chrome. New open tool bookmark. Tab list. In tab list. ARIA states and prop headings menu. 3. Heading level 3. Styled like tab. Just but overview button. You are currently on a specs button. You are currently on a reviews button. You are specs button. Overview button.
Okay, so we can hear that these are 3 buttons, but we don't hear anything about their current state, and we don't have any idea that they're actually what is going to happen when I click that button. So let me go ahead and do that. So I click the overview button, and as far as the screen reader user knows, Nothing happened, right? We didn't hear anything get announced when we clicked that button. Now, visually, the content changed just as it would if I had clicked the overview button with my mouse. So it looks like it works, but you can hear that it's broken. So let me go over to the fixed example and show how that sounds instead.
Headings menu, heading level 3, real ARIA tabs pattern, headings menu, form controls menu. On overview, selected, tab, 1 of 3. You are currently.
So right away, I landed on that overview tab. It happens to be the currently active tab. And I heard that it was selected. I heard that it was a tab. And I heard that it was 1 of 3 tabs. So now I understand I'm on an active tab out of a set of 3. So let me go ahead and look at the other buttons with the screen reader and we'll hear how those sound.
Specs, tab, 2 of 3. Reviews, tab, 3 of 3. You are currently on.
So it makes it really easy to keep track of where I am. And now let me try to activate this reviews button and we'll see what happens.
Selected.
So now I understand that is selected. I knew it was a tab. So now I know that what I can expect is that if I go to the next bit of content on the page, it's going to be the content of that tab.
End of product details, tab reviews, tab panel. You are currently in a tab panel.
And then we have that actual content is marked up as a tab panel. So now I understand, oh, that's the content that was tied to that particular tab. So let me go ahead and turn the screen reader off and we'll review.
Voiceover off.
We'll review what the markup there should look like for a tab list. So obviously in the broken example, it's relatively easy and straightforward to get a set of tabs up and running that just switch out content when buttons are clicked, but we have to do a little bit more work if we want that to actually work for screen reader users. So this is an example of what our code looks like. And I'm going to see how much, let's see. All right. So let's go through this one thing at a time. So the wrapper for the set of buttons has a role of tab list, and that's just the container that's going to contain all of the tabs. And this has an aria label. We could also use an aria labeled by if we had visible text somewhere on the page that we wanted to use instead. But we want to make sure that that has an accessible name so that we understand what the tabs are for. Each of the buttons that are inside there has a role of tab, which tells me that they are the triggers that are going to actually switch out the content. You'll notice that they also have an aria controls on them for which panel they control, right? So my first button is panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. You don't have to number your panels if you want to keep track of them another way. If you wanted to name it review panel and rating panel and information panel, like you can do that too. So it's just using numbers. We're just using numbers here for a quick example. Because the problem with numbering them, of course, is maintainability of your code going forward. Is that now when you come back and you have to insert a tab in the second position, and now you've got 4 tabs, now you have to renumber everything. So it's generally better to not number things for that reason, unless it's happening dynamically. You know, if your PHP or whatever is numbering those for you, by all means. But if you're having to name those manually, try to stay away from numbers. All right. Then we have a role of tab panel, and we see we just have a div that has a role of tab panel. And they have an aria labeled by attribute that are referring back to the button. So my first panel, right, is my overview panel. And I know that it's an overview panel because it's using this aria labeled by, which refers back to this ID, which has the text overview. So that overview is considered the name of that tab panel because we're using that aria labeled by. And then we have aria-selected. So we have that here. On our currently selected tab, it would be true, and on the others, it would be false. So we would have to make sure that we are toggling that Boolean on the tabs as we switch tabs with our JavaScript. I already talked about the ARIA controls that ties them to the panel. We covered the ARIA labeled by that ties the accessible name back to the panel. And then we have our tab index. So you can see that our first button has a tab index of 0, our selected button, I should say. It would be our selected button would have a tab index of 0, and the non-selected tabs would have a tab index of -1. What that will do is it will skip in keyboard order, right? So that we would skip between the tabs with the keyboard. We would tab into the set of tabs. We wouldn't expect to tab to each tab. Instead, we'd expect to use the arrow keys to navigate inside a set of tabs. So we only want one tab to be able to receive keyboard focus, and that's how we accomplish that. So if we go back up here, whoops, tab, just keyboard. Yeah, so there, I'm on reviews. And if I hit Shift Tab, you can see I jump over to the other set of reviews. Now, on the broken example, you can see if I just tab, I'm moving between the tabs. But that's actually not expected behavior for a set of tabs. So instead, what I would expect is that I would use the arrow keys once I was in that set to switch between them. And that's the behavior that we get because we're using the tab index. All right, and then just a note that tabs are selected, not pressed, because we are selecting one tab from a set of tabs. So we're going to use aria-selected there and not aria-pressed or aria-checked or the other ones. All right, let's take a look at current. So aria-current is really helpful for figuring out where we are on a web page. And we'll look at some examples. It's not always a page. So we're not always telling people we're on a current page, but we're telling people where they are in a set of things. So for a website, when we're saying current page, we're saying what page they're on in the set of pages that makes up this website. All right, so here we have a site navigation, and we'll pretend that we're on the home page of the site. And a lot of times, visually, the current page will be highlighted in some way in the navigation visually. But of course, that CSS change isn't communicated programmatically to screen readers or other assistive technology. So that's what we would use the aria-current attribute for. And in this case, I've just visually styled the home link to be bold. In this case, it is visually styled, but also programmatically marked with aria-current. So let me open up the screen reader and we'll look at both of these navigations and we'll hear what sounds different.
Voiceover on Chrome. Our new tool bookmark. aria-current. Aria states and properties demos. Web content. Form controls. Tables menu. Landmarks menu. Demo pages navigation. List 8 items. You are currently in a visited link intro 1 landmarks menu. On item main visited link intro. Where am I? Landmarks Windows links menu headings menu 2 3 aria 3 heading level 3 visual the act site sections visual only navigation. You are currently in a
Okay, so I'm on my broken example of navigation and let me navigate through the links that are in this navigation.
List 5 items. Link home 1 of 5. Link pricing 2 of 5. Link features 3 of 5. Link about 4 of 5. Link contact. You are currently on a link.
Okay, so it is a navigation. It is marked up correctly as a navigation. So I was able to hear there's 5 items here. It was pretty easy to keep track of where I was in the set, but there was no indication to me about which one of those might be the current page. So let's go over to the fixed example and see how that sounds different.
Headings menu, heading level 1 site sections with aria-current navigation. You list 5 items. Current page, link, home, 1 of 5. Link, pricing, 2 of 5. Link, featured.
Okay, I think that's all the further we have to go. We've already listened to the rest of it. But you could hear that when I landed on that first link on home, that it announced current page. So now I immediately understand where I am in this set of 5 navigation options. Let me turn the screen reader off and we'll look at the next example.
Voiceover off.
All right, breadcrumbs, another very common usage for aria-current. So, of course, we have a shop. We've got laptops, 14-inch laptops in Aurora. So we're going to work our way down through this list. And this breadcrumbs are really helpful because they help to communicate the structure of the website and how information there is organized. But they have to be marked up correctly. So let me open up the screen reader and we'll go through the broken example and listen to that. And then we'll look at the fixed example and we'll listen to that one. Whoops, I do that all the time. The keyboard shortcut for opening the rotor and opening the code view are almost the same.
Voiceover on Chrome. Aria current link about 4 of 5. Headings menu 3. Heading level 3. Self link with no marker. You are currently on a heading diagram. Diagram.
Oops, that's not what I wanted. Oh, is it this?
Shop link. You are currently on a link. Laptops link. 14-inch link. Aurora 14 OLED link. You are
Okay, so I just heard the link text read out to me with no indication of what those different links might mean. So let's look at the fixed example and see what happens when we use aria current page. Oops.
Shop link. Laptops link. You are 14-inch link. Aurora 14 OLED current page link. You are current.
So we got that extra bit of context when we got to the end of the breadcrumb that the last breadcrumb was the current page of where we are. So let me turn this back off.
Voiceover off.
There we go. Sorry. I had to try a few times to get the right keyboard. All right. So should the current breadcrumb be a link or a span? And both of them are valid, but we should be aware of what the consequences of those decisions are. So if it is a link with aria page current, we can navigate to it with our other links. It'll be included when we're navigating through the list of links on the page. It is the most discoverable out of all of them. And if you do happen to click it, it just refreshes the current page, which doesn't really hurt anything. It's the same as having the current menu item in your main navigation, right? Like you don't remove home from the navigation on the home page typically, right? And you wouldn't remove about on the about page. That consistency is actually helpful. But you will see a lot of sites use a span, but still use the aria current page. That works, and it would still be communicated for a screen reader user who went to the current page. They would still hear the current page announcement. But if they're just navigating by links, that link doesn't show up in the list, basically. It's missing from the list. And then, of course, you can't just use a span with no aria on it at all, because now it's just some text and it has no semantic meaning whatsoever. It doesn't mean anything to anyone, and it's not very helpful. So you would want to avoid doing that. All right, so let's look at a case for when we have something other than a page, because we have some other values for aria current that we could use. And here's an example of aria current step, where we have a multi-step checkout, and I want to keep track of which step I'm on. So let me open this up let me open the screen reader and navigate through this one, and we'll hear how it sounds.
Voiceover on Chrome. Aria current. Aria states and properties demos Google Chrome. Natalie. Next. Aria-invalid. Required. Aurora 14 OLED. Current page. Broken. Headings menu. 2. Heading level 2. Step indicator. You are currently on a heading level 2 wizard. Aria in step 8 when list checkout progress for items. You are currently in a list.
Okay, so I've got a list of all of my checkout steps. Let's go ahead and step through it and see what it sounds like.
Card 1 of 4. You are currently on a shipping. Current step 2 of 4. You are current.
Right, so I visually, I can see that step 2 looks different than the other steps. So visually, I have an indicator that that's my current step. But now you can hear that when I landed there, it said current step. So programmatically, also, I know which step is the current step. Let me just quickly go through the other 2 there.
Payment 3 of 4. Review. You are currently on a selectable list.
Right. So properly marking that up as a list and then using aria-current helps me know how many steps there are and where I am, even when I can't see the screen and can't see that there are 4 things there and one of them is styled differently. So I can programmatically get that same information. Let me turn the screen reader off.
Voiceover off.
Hey, first try that time. And let's look at what our possible values for aria-current are. So we have page, which is when we want to indicate which page of a website we're on and that we're on, that this, we want to point at this page. This is the one where we are now. Like a "you are here" sticker on a map, right? Step. So if we have a multi-step process and we want to let users know where they are in that process, we would use aria-current step. Aria-current location. So a location within a page. So, a link can be used to jump between different pages of a site, but a link can also be used to jump to different sections of the same site. So you can have navigation within a page, and especially if it's a long page, that can be really helpful. And you want to mark what's the current location, right? So if I have like a little table of contents that's over in the sidebar or something, and I wanted to mark where I currently am in the document, I can mark that over there to say, hey, here's where you are. And I can very quickly understand how the document is put together, how far down it I have navigated, where I am, my current place. We can say aria-current date if we want to indicate the current date in some kind of a date picker or calendar. So if we're doing events or booking appointments or something like that. We can say time when we're talking about the current time. So again, if it's some kind of scheduling and we have a list of times and we want to indicate which one is the current one. And then we can also say true for cases that are not page, step, location, date, or time, but we want to indicate something as current. We can just say true. You can also say aria-current false, but it's really not necessary. You can just leave the attribute off. And then I touched on this a little bit earlier, but you can use these aria attributes in your CSS selectors to style things without having to add extra CSS classes or IDs. So here's an example of how I could use that aria-current attribute to style a link in a navigation, the current link in the navigation, differently from the other links in the navigation without having to add, a current class or whatever onto that link in the navigation. All right, let's take a look at forms. And we're specifically going to look at aria-invalid, aria-required, and aria-describedby. So here we are. We're going to try to submit both of these 2 forms, and we're going to listen to what that sounds like on a screen reader, and then we'll understand why it's important to use some of these attributes on forms to help people figure out how they should be filling them in. So let me open up the screen reader and we'll go to the broken form first and then the fixed one and hear the difference between the 2.
Voiceover on Chrome. New open tool bookmark form validate in form validation. Aria state headings menu. 3 heading level 3 errors visible, not announced. You are currently on a head.
All right, so we're in the broken form. Let me just get down to the button at the bottom, which I think is
heading level 3 states and prof.
That was a good guess. I don't have all of my keyboard shortcuts memorized here. Let's go back.
Heading level 3 errors visible, not enough. Validate email address, password, confirm pass sign up button.
Okay, so we made it to the sign up button. Let me go ahead and try to submit
Desktop group.
Nope.
Form validation. Aria group.
So I submitted the form visually. I can see that all of those fields were required. My email address, password, and confirmed password were all required. But I heard nothing announced to the screen reader. Let's try going back through the form.
Passwords must confirm password. Menu pop-up. Secure text field with autofill menu. To open the autofill menu, press the up or down arrow key, then press the return key to enter.
Okay, we don't need all those instructions. So we could kind of stumble across those instructions and error messages letting us know that we had left things blank. But I think you'll agree that experience definitely could have been better. So let's go over to the next form.
Headings menu. On item 3, form controls menu. On item e-packet sign up button.
All right, take the shortcut there this time. So now I'm on the other sign up button. Let me go ahead and submit that, and we'll listen to what that sounds like in the screen reader.
Email address. Please enter a valid email address. Required invalid data. Email. 3 errors found. Please fix them and try again. You are currently up.
Okay. So right away, as soon as I tried to submit the form, I heard, oh, you didn't fill in your email address, and there's 3 errors total on this form. I heard that little error message read out. Please enter a valid email address. I heard that I had invalid data in there, right? So I understand what the problem is. I understand how to fix it. And you also notice that the focus moved back to that email address field. I didn't have to do it myself. With the broken form on the left, the focus stayed on the submit button. And I had to navigate backward through the form to figure out what was going on. In this case, it jumped me to the first form field that has an error because I'm trying to submit a form. I need to fix it. So that's a valid case where you would want to take over focus from a user and help them along their way. Even if I'm just if I'm a keyboard user, right? That's handy. I don't have to shift tab back to the form fields. My focus is right there. I can just type my email address and hit tab and move along to the next form field. So lots of extra help for this. So let's take a look at some of the markup and how we make a form like that happen.
Voiceover off.
All right, so we have an aria-required property, which tells us that a form field has to be filled in, an aria-invalid property, which can flip between being true or false based on whether or not the entry in a field is invalid or not. We have aria-describedby, which helps us to add extra information to a form field on top of what's already included in the label. And we also have a role status live region, which is what told us that we had 3 errors total in the form. So let's take a look at the markup here. So this is what my form field looks like before I submit. So I have a label with a for attribute that matches the ID of the form field. My form field has an aria-required true and an aria-describedby, which ties it to 2 other elements on the page. So in this case, I have password help and password error. So aria-describedby takes an ID and it can take multiples. They're just space separated. So here I'm using password help and I'm using password error. And we can see password error is currently hidden and empty. There's no text in there at all. Okay, so for password programmatically ties that label to the form field so that when I focus the form field, I hear the label read out. Aria-required announces that the form field is required. Aria-describedby ties that extra instruction, right, of 8 characters or more. It makes sure that when I focus the password field that I hear that extra instruction read out. Otherwise, it's not programmatically tied to the form field, and I wouldn't hear it read out when I focus the form field. And then hidden on the error container, make sure that we're not looking at it and there's no hint of it when it's empty. Okay, so when validation fails, here's what we're going to change. We're going to change the aria-invalid to true And then we're going to fill in information and our password error. We're going to fill in some helpful information that would guide somebody to correcting what was filled in the form field. And I'm going to remove that hidden attribute so that now it becomes visible, and it's visible for screen reader users and visible for visual users. And then we want to make sure that we are flipping aria-invalid back to false once the input gets fixed, because we don't want it to keep reporting invalid when there is valid input. Okay, so let's talk about this aria-required versus required. If you are using semantic HTML elements, you can use the required attribute. You don't need to use aria-required. Aria-required should be saved for when we want to do custom control of some kind. So that's the difference between those two. So like one is semantic and one is not. So if I just have an input type text, I can just use required. If I'm trying to build a custom select element and I want to make it required, or a custom checkbox or something like that, I would have to use aria required and then handle it in the JavaScript. Okay, and then our live region, callback to last week's session that I forgot what the topic was. Okay, so that's just a quick look at how we're making that happen. And just a reminder that if you're going to use a live region, it has to be on the page at load time with no content in it, and then you actually modify the content of the live region. You can't dynamically add and remove live regions from the page. That does not work reliably in different browsers. All right, let's head into our last demo here, which is aria disabled versus disabled. And we'll learn about how these different things work. So I'm just going to try and tab through this page. So I'm just going to click here to make sure that's where my focus is. And you can see that when I hit tab, I did not go to the first submit order button in the box that's labeled native, right? It skipped right over it. If I hit tab again, I go back down to this box that has the right label on it. And if I hit shift tab, I go back to submit order. Shift tab takes me back to the main navigation of the page. So that native disabled is going to work on any kind of semantic form field, and it is going to disable the form field. I can't tab to it. Clicks don't register. So if you're trying to listen to an unclick on a disabled button, it doesn't emit them. There's crazy workarounds, but generally you want a disabled button to be disabled. And often it appears in some way like grayed out, right? We would say it looks faded or as part of the background. And important to note that according to WCAG, disabled form elements do not have to meet color contrast ratios. So it doesn't have to be 3:1 in order to pass. If it's an active button, it does. But a disabled button is excused from color contrast ratios. I think you still probably want to try to meet them just to make sure people can see your button and understand what's happening. But strictly speaking, they do not have to meet color contrast. Okay, now let's look at this button here, which is labeled trap, where we're using aria disabled. And when I click it, you can see that that text down there changed, right? So let me refresh the page and show that again. So if I click this button, it still works, even though it has an aria disabled attribute on it. So you may think, what? That's aria disabled not working. But no, that's actually how it was meant to be. You have to actually pay attention to aria disabled in your own JavaScript code and figure out that you don't want to fire the event. So you can see in this case, the text immediately here did not change. This text down here changed because that's for us to use in the demo. So just let us know that the click button, the button is currently disabled, so the click was ignored. So basically you have to put a fork in your code to check if aria disabled was true. And if it was, then you want to ignore the click. And otherwise, you would handle whatever the click behavior is. So the difference between disabled and aria disabled, disabled not in the tab order, but aria disabled is, unless you explicitly remove it. Do clicks fire? No, not on native disabled elements, but yes. And so in your JavaScript, you have to check for that attribute. Would a form submit include the value? On a native disabled, no. On aria disabled, true, yes, it would. Screen reader announcement, they both get announced as dimmed or unavailable. So they both get announced as a disabled, basically, right? Grayed out, what we would say. And then on custom widgets, right? Disabled does not work on custom widgets. So if I have a div with a roll of button, I can't use disabled. It's not going to do anything. That is reserved for semantic HTML elements only, just like required. And if I am trying to make a div work like a button, then I would have to use aria disabled, and then all that, working out all that functionality on whether or not it should be tabbed to, whether or not something should happen when I click on it, that's all on me, right? So another demonstration of, if I want a disabled button, I'm better off just using a button tag with a disabled attribute, because now I don't have to do anything. I don't have to do any work. I get my accessibility for free. If I'm trying to make a div with a roll of button, well, now I have to use this aria disabled attribute. I've got to make sure JavaScript is handling it. I've got to do a lot of other things as well with the focus and the tab order. And it's a lot of extra work in JavaScript. And there's always something that gets missed when you try to do that. So try to use semantic markup whenever you can. And then here we have just a little description of why we would need to use aria disabled, which is basically when we're using custom controls, we don't have a choice. We have to use aria disabled in that particular case. And then this is how we would check it in our JavaScript, right? So we listen for a click on the button. And if aria disabled is true, then we don't want to do anything. And otherwise, we would do whatever our click handler was going to do. Now, keep in mind that if you forget to do this, the button is going to announce itself as disabled to screen reader users, but it's going to still be functional. So that's super confusing. And it's also probably not what you want, because if you disable the button, you probably don't want anybody interacting with it. And then similarly, there's this little honorable mention down here of aria read-only versus read-only, which is, again, read-only is for the semantic HTML elements, and we would use aria read-only for elements that we're building custom. All right, so we are out of time. We're a couple minutes over. So thank you so much for joining me today. The site, again, is discoverneptune.site/aria. If you want to come over here and try out the debugging examples of how to debug a couple of different really common cases that happen when we're working with aria states, dynamic states and properties. So if you want to give those a try, you can drop me a message on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube. I'll see it and answer your question if you have any. Thank you so much for joining me today. 2 weeks from today, we'll be back doing another stream. That'll be a special stream, actually, because Thursday, the day after my next stream, is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So I'm going to do a little day before Accessibility Day stream. So it should be fun. So join us next time, 2 weeks from today. I think that is the 20th. Is that right? Yes, the 20th, May 20th. Is when we'll be back here next with the GAD stream. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks for the next stream. Thank you.